Hello guys, so this video is slightly later than anticipated, but hopefully you will enjoy it. We're going to go through the myth of Baba Yaga and Vasilisa the Fair, and yes, I did go online and see how we pronounce that, and that's what the pronunciation has told me. Fingers crossed. So I thought it might be really interesting to read through this myth, and I will link where I'm reading the myth from should you wish to go and just read the myth as it is, the folklore, the story. We're having story time together. And we're going to sort of unravel the mysteries behind the mythos as we do it from my point of view, because that's what I like to do. And we're rhyming, apparently. Floof, floof, no. Not wherever floof floof is, but floof floating across my line of vision. So, a long time ago, there lived a merchant and his wife. They had a child, a girl called Vasilisa. So before we even get further on into it than that, I know to one whole line and Joey has things to say. I thought it was interesting here how the myth is around a merchant and his family. Now, a lot of the folklore stories do focus on the rich and powerful. It's often kings and queens, or the gentry, the nobility. I'm feeling very reminiscent, and the rabble. And so it's interesting that this folklore does not revolve around those as usual, but rather merchants. And I was thinking to myself, it's interesting because merchants are kind of liminal as well as being kind of middling in the social strata. They can be very wealthy, of course. Merchants could do very well for themselves, but then they would usually seek to rise through the social strata ranks when it came to certain periods of history. They are quite liminal, and it reminds me of kind of a reflection of later for Baba Yaga. So in different Baba Yaga myths, she sort of tests people. She sort of asks them to perform tasks, and if they manage to do this, then they will receive her boon. And so before we've even gotten to the later part of the mythos, it already has that reflection at the beginning, and it has that cyclic feeling to it as it begins, so it ends. One day the mother placed a little doll in her child's hands and said, "My child, I am dying. Take this doll as my blessing. Always keep it with you and never show it to anyone. If anything bad happens to you, give the doll food and ask for her guidance." Shortly afterwards, the mother died. So I did sort of have notes, and I was thinking it's always a little bit unfortunate. Sort of the step family is very negatively portrayed in all folklore. It's a complete side note, but I thought it's really unfortunate that people it's as if there's a disconnect because they can't mother someone else's child who has died, and it's all very strange with regards to that folklore. It feels like there's a little bit of patriarchy going on there, to be honest. Like, oh, you couldn't possibly love a child unless you birthed it. It's like, don't like it. Anyway, interestingly enough, I feel that Vasilisa in herself is a witch. I mentioned that in the podcast because she gets a spirit doll, and we've done some spirit doll work this month already, from her mother, who then passes away. And so it's possible that her mother's spirit then inhabits the doll. We talked about how a lot of the Slavic dolls had no face, so that spirits couldn't inhabit them and wreak havoc on the children. But this would be a protective spirit from her mother. Is the doll in her mother's spirit? I think so. I think that's the implication. So that's interesting. And the fact that she can talk to the spirit of the doll and feeding the doll it's very witchcraft. It's very puppet, and it's very interesting to me. The merchant soon became lonely and decided to marry again. He married a widow he thought would be a good mother, but both she and her two daughters were envious of Vasilisa's beauty. So we have the Cinderella, and it's a Slavic Cinderella. They gave her heavy outdoor work to do, so she would grow thin and her face turned ugly in the wind and sun. That's really interesting by modern standards, where being thinny Cinderella is the often, at least in societies, it's a whole beauty shadow. So we've got a whole video coming about beauty shadows that I need to make before this cycle completes. But that's interesting to note that the story is talking about like a lot of sun on the face, so and getting a lot of wrinkles in the sun, that sort of thing. Despite this, Vasilisa became more beautiful every day. For each day, she gave her doll food and asked for advice. Having finished eating, the doll would help with the tasks and even bring Vasilisa herbs to prevent sunburn. So this doll is getting up and walking around. This doll is doing work, guys. It's not just a doll that's like whispering things in her ear. There's an animation happening here. This is a little creepy, a little spooky, a little bit dark witchy. By modern standards, at least, you know what I mean. Dark witchy. I'm joking, but we're not being serious there. Just in case anyone thinks. But it's interesting just to note that this doll, through the act of being fed, is advising and helping, and a boon to Vasilisa, and that is later reflected in what Baba Yaga offers. That for service or for trade, she receives boon in return. As the years passed, Vasilisa grew even more beautiful, and her stepmother's hatred of her intensified. We're gonna put that in the beauty shadow video, because we've got much to say about this. But there you go. Then, when Vasilisa's father was away on business, like, what was he doing not to notice all this time that there was real hatred in his house? What was he doing? Like, was he dull-witted? What was happening? Oh, I'll just leave her there, knowing my stepwife hates her. It'll be fine. Anyway, he goes away on business. Then the stepmother moved the family to the edge of a dense birch forest. She just decided, you know, while you're away, we'll move home. It'll be fine. I'm Virgoing the story. It will be fine. But this was not just any forest. This was a dense birch forest in which lived the terrifying witch Baba Yaga, a witch who ate people like others ate chicken. Chicken. And that's really interesting that is right there, because of course Baba Yaga's house is famously on chicken feet or rooster feet with a rooster on top. So that's that interesting imagery into play there, that human beings eat chicken, and they give some to no thought about that. I mean, that's a whole tangent we can go down. Obviously in modern day, even some people who eat meat, no, in modern day, some people who eat meat don't care. Most people these days try and be more ethical about it. You know, some people refuse to eat it at all. It's a whole different conversation that we're not having, but I found that bit of the myth interesting, because Baba Yaga lives in a house which kind of almost venerates the chicken and takes away the power from what it means to be human in the food chain. Every day the stepmother sent Vasilisa into the forest, but the girl always returned safe and sound with the guidance of her magic doll. Then she's a witch. Then one night, the stepmother crept into the house, her own house. Why is she creeping? And extinguished all the candles. Can you imagine sneaking around your own house to extinguish your own candles? It sounds crazy. As the last candle failed, she said in a loud voice, "It is impossible to finish our work in the darkness. Someone must go to Baba Yaga and ask for a light." "I'm not going," the first stepdaughter said, who was stitching lace. "I can see my needle." "I'm not going," said the second stepdaughter, who was knitting stockings. "I can see my needle." So then we have the needles and the sewing and the weaving and the stitching. It's often given to a very feminine energy, which is really interesting, for better or worse. It's a craft with the hands. It's very tactile, and it's imagery of weaving things into being. It's often associated with witchcraft as well. And the needle, I've already kind of shown that I felt that needles were associated with Baba Yaga through the Patreon box, because they'll be receiving a Baba Yaga needle to pierce the veil, to unlock the mysteries. And the two things that they are making are lace and knitted stockings. So stockings, legs, chicken legs in Baba Yaga is already a thing, the thing upon which we stand. And the lace has that connotations of beauty. So it's kind of them making something useful and something beautiful. And they then use that as an excuse not to go. What was Vasilisa doing? Who knows? So Vasilisa was thrown out into the dark, forbidding forest. Despite her fear, she fed the magic doll and asked for its advice. Don't be afraid, Vasilisa, said the doll. Go to Baba Yaga and ask her to give you a light. All that night, she walked nervously through the forest, holding the doll who guided her path. And suddenly, she saw a horseman rushing by. His face and clothes were white, and he was riding a white horse. As he passed, the first light of dawn appeared across the sky. Then another horseman came by. His face and clothes were red, and he was riding a red horse. As he passed, the sun began to rise. Vasilisa had never seen such strange men, and she was very surprised. So those are two of the three horsemen over whom which Baba Yaga has power and dominion, and that has been suggested because she has power over the spirits that change the hours of the day. That is actually indicative of goddess status rather than just being a witch in the woods. She walked all day until at last she came to Baba Yaga's hut, which stood forbidding on its large chicken legs. A fence was made of human bones that surrounded the hut. It was crowned with human skulls. The gate had a sharp set of teeth that served as a lock. Vasilisa was terribly afraid. Suddenly another horseman galloped by. His face and clothes were black, and he was riding a black horse. He descended through the gates and disappeared. As he passed, night descended. We're going to actually talk about the three horsemen a little bit more. I'm thinking I may do it as podcasts just for ease. I might do them as videos, we'll see. But I think there is more to delve into in the lessons and the messages and the energies behind those particular spirits. But for now, as we talk of the lessons of Vasilisa, I think what is important to mention here in the myth is her awareness. She can see these spirits. So she's talking to a spirit doll, and she is seeing spirits which are commanded by Baba Yaga. And I can think of two ways in which you can take this. As I've already suggested, I feel like she's already a witch, so she has powers. She has the ability to speak to spirits and see spirits. Two ideas of kind of clairvoyance, clairaudience, if you can hear them too, and clairsentience, being aware of these spirits. And that sort of shows that she has unnatural abilities. And sometimes she's also described as Vasilisa the Bright, and that otherworldly glow might kind of explain that. And unnatural beauty sometimes is also a connotation of being otherworldly. The other thing that I think could have happened here is Vasilisa has not actually been sent out into the forest. Something else that I felt when I was playing around with the mythos of Baba Yaga is it's possible that she had died or was on the brink of death, and her spirit had fled the body into the forest of Baba Yaga, seeking out Baba Yaga as a psychopomp, as somebody who holds a space between life and death. And I really feel like that's what's happening in the mythos quite a bit. So we already know there was this great hatred between, according to the mythos at least, between the stepmother especially, and these two daughters both have needles. Now, what if it's not needles? What if this is very Game of Thrones, synonymous with knives? Or what if she has already been, at least she is on the brink of death? What if they tried to murder her? And that imagery of the lights all going out, being very secretive, takes on a much more sinister meaning then to hide all the lights, so that she is forced to leave her body almost. And then that maybe makes a little bit more sense with the I can see my needle. Well, how are they seeing the needle in the dark? If all the candles were out, how could they see their needle? You can say that's just an excuse just to get away with not going out, which is, you know, fair, but I'm just wondering if there is a connotation there of knives in the dark, and they could see their own knives. And that is another reason why then Vasilisa could see the spirits along her journey. The place of Baba Yaga is described as a place of death, with the crowned human skulls, also known as Babas, and the fence of human bones. And it's crowned, sorry, the gate then has teeth that serve as a lock, and that lock and key idea that you can't get in, and that sort of closing jaws of death vibe. It's in some being consumed, which Baba Yaga has already been said to do, is consuming people. And that, to me, as I said in one of the Baba Yaga podcasts, is kind of synonymous with different death myths where the god of death, goddess of death, or their creatures consume human beings, consume human souls, so that human souls can then pass over. And so a lot of that imagery is being surrounded by death, being caged in by death, crossing over into a liminal space of Baba Yaga, into the witch's hut. And so it makes me wonder if she is not traveling through a kind of underworld journey herself, Vasilisa, in order to find out whether she will live or die. As the skies darkened, the eyes of the skulls began to glow. Their light illuminated the forest. Vasilisa trembled. She almost wanted to run away, but her legs would not move. Almost immediately she heard a hideous noise. The earth shook, the trees groaned, and there was Baba Yaga riding in her mortar. She stopped and sniffed the air. I smell a human, she cried. Who is here? Vasilisa stepped forward, trembling with fear. She said, I am Vasilisa. My stepmother sent me to you to ask for a light. So there's a few things to note here. Firstly, you've got that otherworldly glowing of the skulls as they take on and signify an otherworldliness again, that as night descends, they bring light into themselves. And that has a very much the eyes of how we see the world, changing, shifting perceptions, a balance of the spirit world coming forth to sort of make things visible that wouldn't otherwise be visible. She cannot move. She feels that she cannot move, perhaps because she's a spirit and she's kind of tethered to this. The idea of the earth trembling and the forest groaning is very, again, indicative of goddess status, that the earth is responding to Baba Yaga, who is riding her mortar and pestle. And that's synonymous with healing for the most part. You can make poisons in a mortar and pestle as well, I suppose, but just to note that. She also gives Baba her name straight away, which is a very interesting detail. Maybe she's very innocent or naive, but giving your true name in situations like this is generally a bad thing in folklore, because then the witch or goddess can have power over you because you have given them your true name. It's a part of folklore that comes up time and again, and it, like, in many different places. And I just again wonder if she's dead and she then can't hide who she truly is, or is dying and cannot hide who she truly is. I know of her, Baba Yaga replied. Stay with me a while. If you work well, I will give you a light. If you do not, I will cook you and eat you. Baba Yaga commanded the gates to open and rode in. Vasilisa followed, and the gates closed behind her. As they entered the hut, Baba Yaga ordered Vasilisa to bring her what was on the stove. There was enough food to feed 10 men. Then from the cupboard, she collected kvass, meat, beer, and wine. Baba Yaga ate and drank everything. She left Vasilisa nothing but a crust of bread. I'm tired, Baba Yaga said. Tomorrow, Vasilisa, you will clean the yard, sweep the hut, cook the supper, and wash the linen. Then, she added, you will go to the corn bin and separate seed by seed the mildewed corn from the good corn, and mind that you remove all the black bits. If you don't complete these tasks, I will eat you. So, Baba Yaga is partakes of a plentiful feast and leaves her very little. This again is kind of showing Vasilisa as having a kind of lack of energy, a lack of consideration. That it could be seen as taunting, and a little bit of cruelty to sort of reflect the cruelty that's already been taken against Vasilisa. But to me, Baba Yaga said she knows of the woman. She knows of her. Why would she know of her? Does she just, in her witch senses, knows everybody who's around the forest? It kind of indicates she knows what kind of individual the stepmother is. She knows about her energy, her hatred. But it makes more sense to me that if she's a murderer, then Baba Yaga would know. Or if she was attempting to take life before she was meant to, Baba Yaga would know. So she eats and drinks, and she eats and a lot, enough to feed 10 men. So again, that otherworldly vibe, goddess vibe, and leaving Vasilisa nothing but a crust of bread. And crust of bread kind of has that vibe of almost nothingness, like she's fading away. Cleaning the yard, sweeping the hut, cooking the supper, and washing the linen are very mundane tasks. They're very everyday. I'm assuming those are sorts of things that Vasilisa would have been doing anyway, and kind of remind her of what the tasks, the chores of life would be like. And then that very otherworldly vibe, which is very like the myth of Psyche, where Psyche is asked to separate seeds out. And so only with otherworldly help is this going to be achievable. Only by having like some witch vibes there is that likely to happen. Soon Baba Yaga started snoring, and her long nose rattled against the roof of the hut. Vasilisa took her doll out of the pocket, gave it a crust of bread, and said, "Please help me. Baba Yaga has given me an impossible task, and if I fail, she will eat me." The doll replied, "Don't be afraid. Eat your supper and go to bed. Mornings are wiser than evenings." That's really interesting. Having sleep on it, basically. Although Vasilisa woke up early the next morning, Baba Yaga was already up. Vasilisa went to the corn bin and found the doll was already picking out the last black bits. The other tasks were also fulfilled. The doll said, "All you have to do now is prepare the supper, and after that you can rest." Vasilisa thanked the doll and went to prepare supper. She cooked the food, laid the table, and waited. As the skull's eyes began to shine, the trees groaned, the earth trembled, and there was Baba Yaga. "Have you done what I told you?" she asked. "See for yourself," replied the girl. Baba Yaga was upset, for she wanted to eat the girl, but the tasks were all complete. Hiding her anger, she said, "Very good," and then cried loudly, "My faithful servants grind the wheat." From nowhere 3 pairs of hands appeared. They took the wheat and vanished. Baba Yaga ate the supper and said to Vasilisa, "Tomorrow you must do the same tasks, and you must go to the tor and sort the dirt from the poppy seeds." So there is this idea that Baba Yaga's nature is to eat her, that this is something that she wants to do. And as a psychopomp would naturally take people over to the other side, that might be her nature, to just go ahead and consume the individual, and then the individual that's dealt with, there's nothing more to deal with. The hands are very interesting because, again, Baba Yaga compels spirit hands out of nothingness, and then which also vanish, to grind wheat, and that is again in that very earth fertility, nature-based vibe. It's often in fertility rituals associated with wheat, and the harvesting of wheat, the sickle is very scythe-like, it's very death-like, and so that kind of wheat energy there has that little overture of something, of being cold, of the end of something, and being ground down into dust. Poppy seeds, by the way, are also associated with death, and the long sleep, and the dosage of things too, because poppy seeds can be delicious, and poppy can also be used in poisons, and so on and so forth. The next morning, Baba Yaga again rode off in her mortar. Vasilisa, with the help of her doll, finished the tasks. In the evening, the old woman came back and checked everything over. The 3 pairs of hands appeared. They took the bin of poppy seeds and vanished. Baba Yaga sat down to eat. "Why," she said, "do you sit there so quiet and still?" "I'm afraid to speak," said Vasilisa. "Would you mind if I asked you questions?" Ask if you want, said Baba Yaga, but remember that not every question has a good answer. This is fascinating. Why are you afraid? You want to eat me? I'm not cool with it. But she does speak when given permission to, and that's very goddess vibes. But that Baba Yaga gives her permission to ask questions, which is also fascinating, perhaps because of the respect that has been given and offered to her, as well as completing of the tasks. But remember, and that hint already that she might be supernatural, spiritual, witchy, Vasilisa as well. But I love that. Not every question has a good answer. Oh, oh. Vasilisa hesitated. It's just on my way here I saw a white horseman. Who was he? That was my bright day, answered Baba Yaga. Vasilisa continued. Then I saw a red horseman. Who was he? That was my red sun, answered Baba Yaga. And then the black horseman overtook me while I was standing outside your gate. Who was he? That was my black midnight, answered Baba Yaga. These horsemen are my faithful servants. Have you further questions? Vasilisa remembered the 3 pairs of hands, but remained quiet. Now I have a question for you, said Baba Yaga. How have you managed to carry on all the work so quickly? Vasilisa replied, my mother's blessing helped me. I knew it, said Baba Yaga. You best to be gone. I will not have people with blessings in my home. With that, the old woman pushed Vasilisa out of the hut and through the gate. Then she gave one of the skulls, stuck it on the end of a stick, and gave it to her, saying, here's a light for your stepmother and her daughters. That's what you came here for, isn't it? A few things to note here. The horsemen are, of course, given titles: Bright Day, Red Sun, Black Midnight, but they are hers. They belong to her, again, hinting that she has goddess status. There's also the blessing of the dead who already died over somebody's spirit is something that Baba Yaga doesn't want to deal with. It sounds messy. I don't want to deal with that. But there is that thing of, in a lot of folklore, that a mother's like dying wish to protect her child is very strong magic. That turns up all over the place. And so the fact that she has already moved on, or perhaps has not moved on and has refused to move on, and the love for her daughter is so strong that her spirit has remained in the doll, is perhaps upsetting the natural balance and the natural order of things in Baba Yaga's supernatural liminal in-between space. And so she honors her word and sends her back with her somewhat gothic lantern. Vasilisa walks all day and by the evening reached her home. As she approached the gate, she was about to throw the skull, but suddenly she heard a muffled voice say, you must keep me. Your stepmother and daughters have need of me. The girl carried the skull into the house. As she entered, the skull fixed its eyes on the stepmother and her 2 daughters. Its eyes burnt them like fire. They tried to hide, but the piercing eyes followed them everywhere, and never let them out of their sight. By morning, there was nothing left of the 3 women except 3 piles of ash on the floor. Vasilisa was unharmed. Yeah. This not very quick death method shows that Vasilisa has a whole lot of vengeance going on. And to me, the pure amount of vengeance that it would take for that doesn't make sense when the whole way through this is our heroine. She's really sweet. She's like Cinderella type. She comes back with the lantern and slowly burns these 2 people to death. And yet she's the heroine. So firstly, it definitely has like dark witchy connotations, but I really feel that that is symptomatic of the fact that she was brought back from death, because that would then make more sense that they had tried to murder her and were letting her bleed out, and her spirit went across the forest, met with the psychopomp and goddess Baba Yaga, and then came back because of having completed the tasks, having made fair trade for her life, returned with a supernatural object of power into the body, and through those eyes, having known what these individuals have done, delivered supernatural justice. She buried the skull in the garden and went to find shelter in the nearest town. Here she lodged with an old woman. The one, because, you know, just random old woman. One day the old woman gave Vasilisa some flax. With this, she spun the most beautiful thread, so fine it was like hair. When she weaved the thread into the most exquisite cloth, it was brilliant white, soft, and beautiful. Vasilisa gave it to the old woman and said, "Grandmother, you have been kind to me. Sell this cloth and keep the money." The old woman looked at it and said, "My child, this is too fine to sell. I'm going to take it to the Tsar." The Tsar. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. That's the one I should have looked up for. So she brought it to the Tsar as a gift. He thanked the old woman and gave her many presents before sending her home. So impressed with the beautiful cloth, he tried to find someone who could make shirts from it. However, all the tailors declined the work as the cloth was too fine for them to handle. So in the end, he called the old woman and said, "You must also know how to sew the cloth as you made it." The old woman replied, "No, your majesty, it was not my work. It was done by the girl I took in." So the Tsar asked the old woman to see if Vasilisa would make the garments. She made shirts, and the old woman took them to him. As she waited for the old woman to return, one of his servants entered. He said loudly, "The majesty wishes to see the needlewoman who made his fine clothes." So she went to the palace. They were captivated by one another, and eventually they married. And when her father returned, they invited him and the old woman to come live at the palace. Also at the palace was the little doll, for Vasilisa carried it around in her pocket until she died. So that part is not in some of the mythos, but I mean, the father comes back, everybody's ashes. He's fine with it. But it does have that switch, because then when she's then engaging in spinning, creating items of clothing, which was used against her in the beginning, she sort of steps into her power. The cloth is so beautiful, so it has that otherworldly vibe to it, right? That it's not naturally made, it's made by magic. It's weaved into that sort of spinning wheel, Sleeping Beauty-esque folklore story. And so impressed is this guy with his shiny shirts that he falls in love with her and marries her. That sounds like witchcraft to me. Just saying. Just saying. So what can we learn from the mythos of Vasilisa? What do I think are some of the important things to note? She's known as Vasilisa the Fair, and we are going to talk about, in a separate video, like I said, about beauty shadows and what that means. Although it's interesting that she gets married not off the back of her beauty, but because of the things that she created and wove with her hands. And that fitted with that really interesting Baba Yaga inspired grandmother quote that I shared the other day about everything being in your hands, when, you know, taking your pain out through your hands and creating beauty in the world. So that has an interesting idea of, she could show what she could create, and that was the path into happy marriage for her, or at least riches and marriage. So it is interesting that she ends up married to the, you know, one of the most important people in the realm. And there is from merchant to riches, I guess, is your traditional rich guy appearing in the mythos. But I do feel that Vasilisa has supernatural abilities, some of which are obvious, some are not. I think that spinning and that weaving that flax into very fine clothing was another symptom of witchcraft. But I do feel that she went through a near-death experience, and Baba Yaga was on the edge of reality, and whether she lived or died was kind of whether or not she completed these tasks, which most people would have failed at and most people would have died. But her supernatural abilities meant that she could go on, that she could return to her body and take revenge, because that revenge is perhaps more violent than anything Baba Yaga displays. Or, I mean, we have been told what Baba Yaga will do. The threat is there, but she doesn't actually partake of eating human, that we know of, apart from the bones that are surrounding her. So there is, of course, that. But she shows resilience, Vasilisa. She shows conquering her own fear. She is aware of her surroundings. She questions the things that she's intrigued to know, and questioning the spirits also may have clued in Baba Yaga to the fact that she did have supernatural abilities, and then the blessing of the doll is perhaps the excuse. So perhaps by her questions showing that she was spirit aware and she could see the spirits of which Baba Yaga had dominion over, perhaps that in so doing she recognized the status of Baba Yaga in another way of saying, I recognize these spirits are occurring and that you have dominion over them. The hands are interesting. In some versions of the myth, the spirit hands help Vasilisa instead, and the doll tells her not to mention the spirit hands to Baba Yaga. That's in a different interpretation or different, perhaps, translation of the myth. I have seen that one mentioned, but the spirit hands is really interesting as well, because again, the hands are the instrument by which a lot of the fate is carried out in the Vasilisa myth. The needles are mentioned with the weaving at the beginning. If they did harm Vasilisa, then, you know, that would be stabbing motions. It would also be the pinching of the candles going out. It's all to do with the hands and the way that the hands weave things into being. And it has that really interesting energy. And that kind of ties back into this week's Star Drive Overdrive, in which the two tarot cards showed the different places in which their hands were, and whether your hands were bound, even though they weren't really, or whether the hands were like open in gratitude and open to receiving. And how we interact with a lot of the world is through our hands. Not entirely, of course, but for most of us, it is a very important part of how we interact and play and touch and weave the world. And it allows us the sense of touch, and often touch is indicative as well of otherworldly spirit activity. Sometimes we feel a hand touch us, or on our shoulder or something like that, and it is a comforting thing or an awareness thing or a perception thing. Eyes were of importance too, of course. The skull's glowing, that otherworldly light, and then they burnt the people who I assume tried to kill Vasilisa to death. So that's really interesting, because in the first part, the skulls glow, their eyes glow with this otherworldly light. They illuminate the forest. They make Baba Yaga's presence known. And then in the human world, across the forest, they burn people to death. They take on a very different role. Illumination versus burnt to a crisp. And it just makes me feel that those eyes of burning glowy death were actually more to do with justice being served. We have seen what you have done. We have seen that you have tried to cause death and take life when it was not yours to take, and we slowly burn you to crispy piles of ash in your own home, which sounds painful and horrifying and definitely like a punishment from the other world. Through of which, of course, Vasilisa carries that out. She becomes a conduit of the spirit realm. So she moves from just receiving messages and being aware of the spirit realm to acting within it, carrying out chores, and presumably eating otherworldly food. So that kind of imbibing and connection to the other world kind of strengthens her. She overcomes that task and test and maybe takes on more spiritual power, more witchy power. So did she undergo a kind of spiritual witch initiation? I think so. And then when she went out into the world from that place, from her vengeance, she then crafted something, wove something into being, and that led her to her marriage and presumable wealth. So Vasilisa's story is very much one of resilience. It's interesting that her beauty is mentioned in the beginning and then that kind of falls away, and that to me is really interesting, because it's like, oh, she was so beautiful, blah 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 blah, and then that doesn't matter an inkling. Like, that's just kind of given as a vehicle as why the stepmother hated her, which is a shame. It's kind of a old hat anti-feminist kind of thing, but we will talk about that more, like I said, in a different video. So for her, it really is resilience, it's overcoming, and the connection to her innate abilities and powers. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at our own energies, that sometimes resilience is what we have to overcome. Sometimes what makes us really witchy or in connection with our spiritual self is our resilience and how we go through the world and how we overcome. Not necessarily how we burn people to crispy piles of ash, though. Maybe avoid that one. Many blessings, guys. I hope you enjoyed this story of Vasilisa and some of the energies behind it. I will talk to you very soon. Many blessings.